Imagine a young, undefeated, and arrogant fighter who dominates the octagon not just with his strength but with his ego. He doesn't fight just to win, he fights to humiliate. Every punch comes with a taunt. Every victory is a spectacle of pure arrogance. He believes he's untouchable. But then, in the middle of the crowd, he sees someone who isn't impressed. Jason Statham, action movie star, sits in the front row, watching in silence. No applause, no smile, just observing. The fighter can't resist. Still breathless from his match, he grabs the microphone and challenges Statham in front of thousands of people. He laughs. He thinks Statham is just an actor, that Hollywood has nothing to do with real fighting. But what happens next leaves the entire arena in silence. Jason stands up. No words, no expression. The crowd realizes, this isn't acting. This is going to be real. Want to know how this story ends? Watch until the end. Have you ever seen a bully put in his place before? Leave a comment below and tell us your story. And of course, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss more epic stories like this one. See you next time. The arena pulsed with an almost tangible energy. The deafening roar of the crowd echoed off the concrete walls, a collective wave of anticipation and excitement. The spotlight swept across the cage at the center of the stadium, reflecting off the polished floor, illuminating every detail of the octagon where, in just a few minutes, a brutal spectacle was about to unfold. The fans were ecstatic. They held colorful signs with the names and slogans of their favorite fighters. Some waved flags, while others leaned against the security barriers, eagerly awaiting a glimpse of their idols. Cameras panned across the audience, capturing faces full of pure adrenaline, the energy of a crowd about to witness something grand. Amidst that noisy crowd, between businessmen, celebrities, and sports journalists, Jason Statham sat in silence. Unlike the other VIPs, who chatted animatedly and raised champagne glasses, he remained still. His eyes were fixed on the octagon, focused, without the need for showmanship. No bodyguards around him, no flashy gestures, just him, dressed in a dark blazer, an open-collared shirt, relaxed posture, yet carrying an unmistakable presence. There was something about him that made those around him take notice, even without a single word spoken. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, sharp and observant, reflected the intensity of someone who knew exactly what was about to happen. Inside, at the center of it all, the real spectacle was about to begin. The undefeated fighter of the night, a young MMA prodigy, warmed up with quick jumps, muscles tense, ready for yet another victory. His name was chanted in unison by the crowd, not just for his skill inside the cage, but because he made sure to be seen. He loved the attention, thrived on it. He was explosive, technical, ruthless, but above all arrogant. He didn't just want to defeat his opponents. He wanted to humiliate them, dismantle them completely, show the world that he was superior. His fight wasn't just about strength and endurance, it was psychological as well, and he knew how to play that game very well. On the other side of the octagon stood his opponent, a veteran, a man who had fought many battles, felt the pain of broken bones, bitter defeats, and hard-earned victories. Someone who had earned respect not with words but with sweat and blood. He didn't need to shout to be heard. He didn't need to provoke anyone for the world to know he was dangerous. But none of that mattered to the young fighter. He saw the veteran as just another obstacle to be crushed, another trophy for his collection. For him, this fight wasn't about respect, it was about spectacle, and he knew exactly how to entertain the crowd. Outside the cage, coaches shouted last-minute instructions. Referees made the final preparations. The flashes of journalists' cameras flickered like tiny lightning bolts around the ring. Amidst all of this, Jason Statham kept watching. He wasn't cheering, he wasn't chatting, he was just observing. And at that moment, unknowingly, the young fighter was about to sign his own sentence. The gong sounded, cutting through the deafening noise of the crowd like a sharp blade. The fight had begun. The young fighter advanced immediately without hesitation. His feet slid precisely over the padded floor of the cage, each movement fluid and calculated. He was in control from the very first second, as if that octagon was his second home. His hands rose in a guard that was almost provocative, as if telling his opponent that this fight had already been decided before it even began. The veteran, on the other hand, stood firm, studying his rival with experienced eyes. He did not advance immediately. He tried to measure the distance, adjust the pace, find a pattern in the young fighter's attacks. But he had no time. The young fighter was not there to measure anything. He was there to destroy. His first strikes came like machine gun fire. Quick jabs, sharp crosses, a kick to the waistline to test his opponent's endurance. The impact reverberated through the veteran's body, forcing him to retreat instinctively, trying to find an opening to counterattack. But the young fighter didn't allow it. Every attempt to respond was smothered by another strike, another fierce advance. The sound of punches echoed through the arena. The crowd roared with every successful impact, divided between admiration and shock at the young fighter's speed and precision. He moved like an unstoppable predator, controlling the space with ease, making the veteran dance exactly where he wanted. With each passing second, it became clear that this was not a balanced fight. It was a massacre. The veteran attempted one final reaction. He lunged forward, trying to break through the young fighter's guard with a quick and powerful punch, putting all his strength into the charge. But his opponent was ready. The young fighter dodged with an agile movement, spinning to the side and leaving the veteran exposed. Then, the final blow came. A devastating uppercut shot up from the ground like lightning, landing perfectly on the veteran's chin. The impact was brutal. The dry sound of the punch reverberated through the stadium like muffled thunder. The veteran's eyes rolled back before his body even began to fall. He collapsed onto his back, arms spread, motionless. The referee acted instantly, throwing himself between the fighters and signaling the end of the match. Medics rushed into the cage, kneeling beside the veteran to check his vital signs. But the young fighter didn't care. He was already standing, arms raised, like a king who had just claimed his territory. His face was illuminated by a smile of pure contempt. He walked around the cage like a performer on stage, absorbing the crowd's cheers, feeling the adrenaline coursing through his veins like fire. But the celebration was not just for himself. He wanted more. The young fighter leaned over the fallen veteran, the smile still on his face, filled with scorn. His heavy breathing did nothing to hide the satisfaction he felt. With a low voice, but loud enough for the microphones to catch, he whispered something close to his opponent's ear. "Was that all you had?" The taunt came with a short laugh, almost a sigh of disdain. He quickly glanced around, noticing the cameras focused on him. "Perfect. Retire, old man, this sport is no longer for you." The veteran, still struggling to catch his breath, could barely react. But the young fighter wasn't expecting a response. He had already achieved what he wanted, a spectacle of humiliation. Then he lifted his head and looked around the arena, waiting for the reaction. Some people cheered, excited by the brutality of the fight. But others looked visibly uncomfortable. The silence of some spectators contrasted with the euphoric screams of others. That was when he saw it. There in the front row, sitting in the VIP section, Jason Statham wasn't cheering. He wasn't clapping. He wasn't reacting. He was just watching. The young fighter felt something different at that moment. A slight chill, almost imperceptible, running down his spine. For a moment, it seemed like the crowd around him had disappeared. It was just him and Jason. The actor's gaze was steady, unshaken. There was no hint of surprise, no admiration, just a firm presence, as if he had already known from the beginning exactly how this fight would end. The fighter blinked, trying to regain his composure. But something was bothering him, something inside him, needed in that validation. He couldn't ignore that silent figure in the audience. Driven by a mix of adrenaline and arrogance, he walked toward the cage's fence and grabbed the microphone from the announcer's hands. His breathing was still heavy, his muscles pulsing with the energy of victory, but his voice came out loud and clear. He wanted everyone to hear. His gaze returned to Jason. He raised one hand, pointing directly at him, with a smile full of provocation. The crowd fell silent for a second before exploding into cheers and laughter. Some found it funny, others exchanged uncertain looks, but Everyone was waiting for the response. But Jason Statham did not respond. He just sat there, his eyes locked onto the young fighter. The energy in the arena shifted. The noise was still there, but it was different now. It was as if everyone was waiting for something inevitable. The noise was still there, but it was different now. It was as if everyone was waiting for something inevitable. The fighter laughed, raised his arms, encouraging the crowd to keep shouting. But with each passing second, Jason's silence became louder than any provocation. Then, without a single word, Jason Wang stood up. The tension in the air thickened like smoke, heavy with anticipation. The frenzy of the crowd began to fade, as if each person in that stadium instinctively held their breath, sensing that something far greater was about to happen. The young fighter, still smiling, looked around and realized that the crowd was no longer chanting his name. The enthusiasm that had surrounded him before had transformed into an uneasy silence. Something was different. And then, Jason Statham stood up. There was no rush, no exaggeration. His movements were precise, each gesture filled with an unshakable certainty. He slid one hand over his jacket, adjusted his shoulders, and took a step forward. The sound of his shoes against the floor echoed through the arena, ringing out in an almost ghostly way. The crowd froze. The energy in the arena shifted in an instant. The deafening noise from before had been replaced by a tense stillness, the kind of silence that precedes something monumental. The young fighter, who moments earlier had displayed absolute confidence, felt something strange inside him, a sensation he didn't quite recognize. His smile didn't fade immediately, but his jaw tensed, and the gleam in his eyes now carried something new: doubt. For a moment he tried to maintain his composure, moving his arms, stretching his neck as if nothing was out of the ordinary. But he could feel it. He felt that this was not a game, that this was not a movie script, that this was real. Security hesitated for a moment. No protocol had ever accounted for a situation like this. Jason Statham wasn't scheduled to fight that night, but no one dared to stop him. The weight of his presence was undeniable. Nearby security guards exchanged glances, unsure of what to do. But before anyone could intervene, the cage door opened. The decision had already been made. Jason stepped in calmly. His steps were firm, calculated. He showed no rush, no urgency to prove anything. The cage floor creaked under the weight of his shoes, and every movement he made was watched by thousands of attentive eyes. On the other side, the young fighter still wore a smile, but something about him had changed. Small details betrayed his once absolute confidence. The way his hands moved slightly too fast. The faint tremor at the corner of his mouth. The gleam in his eyes that had once overflowed with arrogance now carried a trace of doubt. But he had to maintain his composure. He stepped forward, rolling his shoulders as if stretching his muscles. He swung his arms, flexed his fists. He gave his neck a quick twist, cracking the bones slightly, forcing an exaggerated expression of boredom. He pretended to yawn. The crowd did not react as he expected. Before, any provocation of his was met with laughter, cheers, and excitement. Now the audience was different. The same enthusiasm was no longer there. The euphoric cheers had faded. There was silence. Not the comfortable silence of a tense moment, but a silence thick with anticipation. A silence that indicated everyone was waiting to see something they never imagined witnessing. Jason just stood there, his eyes locked onto the young fighter, analyzing every tiny detail. His muscles were relaxed, but his posture was impeccable, as if ready for any movement without needing to prepare. The tension inside the cage was tangible. The young fighter began to move, taking small steps, subtle shifts. He needed to break this moment, to do something before the doubt inside him grew. Then he attacked. Without warning, without hesitation. His body moved instantly, as fast as lightning. His fist shot upward in a powerful uppercut, aimed directly at Jason's chin with the force of someone used to knocking opponents out. And he missed completely. Jason slid to the side as if he had anticipated the strike before it was even thrown. His body moved just enough, dodging effortlessly without even seeming like it required concentration. The young fighter backed up and tried again, a straight punch. Jason leaned back, letting the fist pass right in front of him, cutting through the air. The fighter didn't waste time. He rotated his hips and launched a high kick, fast, precise. But all it met was empty space where Jason had been a millisecond before. Nothing connected. The attacks kept coming. Another punch. Another kick. A desperate attempt to grab Jason. But each time he advanced, he found only emptiness. It was like trying to strike a ghost. The crowd began to realize. This wasn't an actor versus a fighter. This wasn't a choreographed moment for the cameras. The young fighter wasn't facing someone pretending to fight. He was facing someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Frustration began to grow. The young fighter panted, his chest rising and falling faster. Sweat started to form on his forehead. Every missed strike seemed to drain a little more of his confidence. And then, the fatal mistake. Desperate to land a hit, he lunged with everything he had, throwing his entire body weight into one final decisive blow. Jason saw the opening. His eyes analyzed the trajectory, measured the distance, found the perfect moment. It was a single strike. Simple, precise, devastating. Jason's fist shot up with surgical precision, landing squarely on the young fighter's chin before he could react. The effect was immediate. The fighter's body lost coordination instantly. His knees buckled, his legs wobbled. For a brief second, he remained frozen, as if his mind was still trying to process what had just happened. And then he fell. It wasn't an awkward tumble, it wasn't a slow collapse. It was as if someone had shut off his lights all at once. The sound of his body hitting the floor echoed throughout the entire arena. And for the first time that night, no one screamed. There was only silence. The young fighter blinked, dazed. His vision was blurry. He tried to move, but his body wouldn't respond. His mind spun in confusion, trying to grasp how everything had happened so quickly. And then, his eyes found Jason. He was still there, standing, unshaken, looking down at him. Jason did not celebrate. He did not raise his arms. He did not smile. He just stood there as the young fighter processed for the first time that he had made a colossal mistake. Then Jason turned around. With the same calm he had entered, he walked toward the cage exit. Each step echoed in the arena's silence. Not a single word was spoken. No dramatic gesture was made. He simply left. And in that instant, everyone understood that they had not just witnessed a Hollywood action scene. They had just witnessed something real. The crowd erupted in a deafening roar. But it wasn't the same noisy excitement that had echoed before, that energy filled with adrenaline and idolization for the young, arrogant fighter. No. What filled the arena now was something different. It was a raw, intense energy, charged with absolute respect. The shouts of surprise, the sound of hands clapping against the metal railings, the chants that began spreading like wildfire through the stands. All of it transformed the atmosphere into something far greater than just a fight. The change was clear. Jason Statham had just dismantled in a matter of seconds not only an opponent, but the entire illusion of invincibility that the young fighter carried. And he did it without a single word. On the ground, the young fighter was still dazed. His muscles trembled slightly. His vision remained blurred. His body insisted on moving, on responding. But something inside him knew it was already too late. The crowd's cheers were no longer for him. Before, those same people had screamed his name, cheered for his strikes, celebrated his arrogance as if it were part of the spectacle. But now he was no longer the center of attention. The sound filling the arena was different now. Jason. 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 The chants started faintly but grew, getting louder with each passing second. They spread through the stands like an unstoppable wave. The young fighter felt a knot in his stomach. He had never experienced anything like this before. He had never been ignored before. Slowly he sat up, his arms resting on his legs, his breathing heavy. Every muscle in his body protested against the blow he had taken. But the physical pain wasn't the worst part. The worst part was looking around and seeing what had happened. The cameras were still on him, but now no longer as the protagonist of the night. Now, he was the loser. The flashes captured every detail, the sweat dripping down his forehead, the dazed look in his eyes, the expression he tried to keep firm but failed to hide the humiliation. And above all, Jason Statham was no longer there to witness his defeat. He had already left the cage. The crowd continued to chant his name, but Jason didn't need to stay to receive the applause. He didn't look back. He didn't stop to see the damage he had left behind. He simply walked away as if it had been just another ordinary day. The young fighter felt something he had never felt before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't frustration. It was a bitter, sharp, profound realization. He had spent his life building his reputation around the idea that confidence was everything, that the more he talked, the more respect he would earn, that the more he humiliated his opponents, the more untouchable he would become. But that night, Jason Statham showed him something different. Respect is not demanded. Respect is not imposed. True respect is earned through actions. The young fighter lowered his head for a moment, closing his eyes. He felt the weight of the moment, the weight of the lesson he had just learned in the hardest way possible. The crowd continued to applaud, but now he knew those cheers were never meant for him. That night, a lesson was taught in the clearest way possible. The young fighter believed that arrogance was a sign of strength. He thought that the more he talked, the more respect he would earn, that the more he humiliated his opponents, the more untouchable he would become. But Jason Statham proved that true power is not in words, but in actions. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to provoke. He didn't need to show off. With a single precise strike, he shattered not just the fighter's body, but the entire illusion of invincibility he carried. And the crowd? At first, they cheered for the young fighter, but in the end, they understood who truly deserved respect. This story teaches us that real strength doesn't come from arrogance, but from discipline, self-control, and the quiet confidence of someone who knows exactly what they're capable of. And you? Have you ever seen a bully put in his place before? Have you experienced something similar? Comment below and share your story with us. If this story kept you hooked until the end, leave a like to support the channel and help us bring more epic content like this. And of course, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another exciting story. See you next time.